Welcome back, MTG Joe here. We're here for another installment of the weekly meta breakdown where we look at the top performing decks on the MTG Arena ladder. This video will be covering the standard best of one format. We'll cover best of three in an adjacent video. If you're looking for past weeks, it's always there, so you can catch it. We'll also try to cover all the other formats this week on Arena. We did a primer for Alchemy, which we don't typically cover, but with the upcoming qualifier play-ins, we did a quick overview with that. I put out some gameplay video as well if you're looking to pick up a deck ahead of either the qualifier play-in this month or the actual qualifier weekend itself. So we're covering there. March is also a pretty big month because we're going to have 4 metagame challenges starting this upcoming weekend. It's going to be standard, then we'll have Explorer, Historic, and Timeless. So we'll be doing deep dives into all those, giving you a bunch of deck list ideas that you can take to that event. I'm actually very excited for those. Those are my favorite events on Arena. But we'll jump into standard best of one right now. This is going to cover the tail end of the month of February into the beginning of March. So end of ranked season for February and the first few days of ladder climbing for March. And we get the data as always from UntapGG. What you see on the screen, companion tool that aggregates users' win rates, gives us a cool bunch of stats, tracks your own win rates as well. The link is in the video description if you're interested in getting started today. Let them know that I sent you. Otherwise, I'll timestamp and paste all these deck lists. So we're going to start off with looking at the popularity of decks today, and then we'll go into the actual decks themselves. Kind of a cool list that we have today. So I'll cover that at the end of the video. It doesn't show up in the Untap stats itself in terms of volume of games, but one creator from Twitch, Mojoe, got upwards of number 3 Mythic, went on a pretty crazy run with a wild deck. Latest iteration was 22-2 to get up to number 3 Mythic. So we'll cover that. That'll be at the end of the video, so make sure to tune in for that. So beginning of the month, we usually see a correlation where everyone puts away their brews and jumps into aggro because there's the race to Mythic. People like hitting that number 1 spot as early as possible. And that's kind of what we see in the trend of the popularity of the decks thus far, being Boros Convoke and Mono Red Aggro. If we look at, for example, shifting down, we still see that representation, but we see a little bit more of Azorius Control, Jeskai Control in the mid 5s, but still, 36-37% of the meta being these more aggressively slanted decks, where even here we're at 33. So it kind of tails off a bit, but we're seeing, for the most part, kind of tiers of these hyper-linear aggressive decks looking to kill as quick as possible, the control decks that are looking to kind of combat them, and then like a lower tier where there's these mid-range style strategies which are trying to walk the line of dealing both with aggro and control, but in best of one have a little bit harder of a time given that you can't really tailor. You can draw a handful of cut downs and then you get paired up against blue-white control. Or you get your duresses and then you're playing against mono-white humans that's just playing 30 creatures. So it's kind of the issue of some of the mid-range decks in the best of one format. If we're looking at the representation, like we've seen mono red peak as high in January at 42%, and kind of the ebbs and flows. We look at the beginning of the month, and it peaks up again, and then it falls. And then we're seeing it peak up again. We're just now with mono red, we're also getting the kind of adjacent Boros Convoke deck also showing up in the stats itself. So we're going to dive into the decks themselves. As always, I think I mentioned this on past videos, we're trying to hit 15,000 subs on the YouTube channel. We're just shy of 12,000. You can see the ticker in the top right-hand corner. If you haven't subbed to the channel, it's free, easy, help support. We get these videos out every week. If you have some, thank you very much. Likes and comments are always greatly appreciated to help with the YouTube overlord algorithms. So we are going to actually look at Diamond to Mythic Rank. 110,000 games played from February 5th through the 3rd, the last 7 days. I did kind of go down to Platinum to just find a budget list. I'm going to try to do as much as possible every week, include one budget list, if it exists. Just to give you, like, folks, especially newer players, an idea of something that could get them started. It usually gets asked, like, what should we play? If you have, like, no rare wild cards, this is one that we can take a look at, so I'll cover that as well. But Boros is the top deck, but not Boros Convoke. Boros Humans, 67.4%, 140 games, and this is Boros in the lightest way possible. It's a mono-white deck splashing Imidane's Recruiter, so, it's like mono white that you just drew on with a Sharpie, a red Sharpie, but we see the human package, kind of a mix of some elements of the Convoke deck, but also just with the old mono white humans deck, Hopeful Initiate as a training partner that gets bigger and then can also blow up enchantments, which is kind of relevant against like Aurelia's Call or whatever the enchantment is, the Anthem effect. Temporary Lockdown could also get hit. Luminarch Veteran helps in the creature mirrors, just gaining some life. Card advantage from a recruitment officer. Warden of the Inner Sky, there are a bunch of things you could tap down. Give you some value there as well. Copper Coat as a Lord Anthem effect and protection. Resolute as multiple bodies. Thalia for tax. Then you have your 3-drop package, a couple Adolins and Sanguines to go wide. Brutal Cathar as basically the only removal in the deck. Imidanes as another Anthem effect, and can also just be cast for the Trained Troops mode from the Adventure to give you some bodies. And then Knight Errant of Eos gives you some card advantage. This version of the mana base is a lot better than the Boros Convoke deck because you're not as reliant on hitting both red and white mana. Your red splashes are mostly going to come from Secluded Courtyard, Cavernous Souls, and then a couple Battlefield Forge. Mirrex technically in a pinch as well. So Boros Humans making a return. We haven't seen like mono white-ish humans or mono white aggro in a couple weeks. It was largely kind of passed by Boros Convoke, but we're seeing kind of a return to that. Moving on, Boros Convoke. So then we have the Convoke version. We're seeing the full Sanguine or 3 Sanguine Evangelists, 3 War Leaders Call. We're seeing the Resolute Reinforcements, 1 Regal Bunnycorn, and then a couple copies of Luminarch Veteran. Again, just having another card in here as a way to gain life. We've seen pretty much the cases getting cut out. Case is good to deal bigger creatures, but it seems like best of 1 is just really linear, so it lets you go a little bit more refined, and then Luminarch absorbs some damage early. Basically, the core of the deck, what you want to do is get a Novice Inspector over there in Aperture, turn 1, and then you Gleeful Demolition the artifact token that if it gets produced, and then you'll have 1 mana left over. Knight Errant of Eos can Convoke out, so you get like a whole bunch of power on turn 2, and then some more card advantage. Mana base with this one, you're leveraging like Cavernous Souls. Pretty much every creature is a human in the deck, other than the Vampire, Sanguine Evangelist, and Voldaren Aperture, or Regal Bunnycorn, which is a Rabbit Unicorn, as one would be. But you're playing a little bit odd. Sometimes you'll see Thran Portals in here. There's no fast line in Boros, which this deck desperately wants Inspiring Vantage in this deck. So the mono red aggro deck of this week is an interesting one that we're seeing. While there's some placements of the regular, Squee and like Voldaren, or not Intrepid Adversary, the Red Adversary kind of burn package. This one is a mechanized warfare version, which I had largely fallen off, but we're seeing it in kind of increased numbers. And it's kind of an interesting tech because there's so many of these decks we're seeing now that are going wide. So you have End the Festivities, which on its own works really well against tokens. And then it scales well with Mechanized Warfare, which each copy of Warfare out deals 1 additional damage. There's also Tectonic Hazard, which is kind of the same idea as End the Festivities, deals 1 damage to each opponent and each creature they control. So basically the only difference is the End the Festivities technically hits a Planeswalker as well. So slightly better, but kind of more effects of the same ilk, which is kind of cool. Other than the deck, just very low curve in terms of aggro. Apertures ping for some extra damage. Your Lightning Strikes, Play with Fires, Fugitive Codebreaker for some card advantage potentially. Feldin as well, and the Creature Mirrors works pretty well. 21 lands with a bunch of utility lands. From there, moving on, we go to Esper Mid. So this is one of those decks that can have reasonable draws against both control and aggressive decks, but at the same time can get some awkward kind of mixes. What helps with the Esper version compared to, say, something like Golgari is you have Rafine, which helps you get rid of the wrong half problem. If you have a handful of removal, attacks from Rafine can ditch those cards. If you have hands full of like reactive spells, you can ditch those effects. You have Bat for hand disruption, Denix Nice Lifelinker, a bunch of different removal and interaction spells. Tidebinder can be used for kind of some instant speed shenanigans. Wedding Announcement gives you multiple bodies. Emperor in here, kind of some more resilient threats. Virtue plays at flash speed, as well as Alcazatz can attack the hand and is a recursive threat. So with really what you're doing here is you have a lot of elements that could come down at flash speed. So it lets you play better into a control deck, where typically with these mid-range decks you play sorcery speed, you're more susceptible to things like Sunfall, stuff of that nature. Full Restless Anchorage in here as well, kind of playing in that. I played in the Pizza Box Open last weekend with Mono Red in best of 3. The one thing I did with Mono Red is I switched to Myrex, at least in best of 3, because the games are more grindy, there's more blue-white control, just because I found, personally, the Mishra's Foundry lines up very poorly with Restless Anchorage being a 2-3, where Myrex lets you create multiple bodies over multiple turns and just lets you kind of attack at a different angle. Mono Black Control, Mono Black Midrange, probably more control, but this is kind of your... I got a ton of removal effects, cut downs, duress for hand hates, marches in here, long goodbye, go for the throats, path to peril, sweeper for aggressive decks, deadly cover up as like now black has an unconditional sweeper, not as good as Sunfall, but still an attack in that avenue. Your win conditions are Alcazar, Shieldred, technically an ultimate from Liliana could set them back quite a bit, Myrex in the mana base, greedy freebooters, just an early blocker that can help you ramp, set up your draws. And then your main kind of value engine is Outrageous Robbery. Just steal a whole bunch of your opponent's cards, play their lands, steal their win conditions as well. This gives you some nice outs in like the control matchups or stuff like that. We look at something like this compared to like the Rafine decks, it's harder for you to get rid of the wrong half cards here. There's a lot of cards that are dead in this deck against control. While Arena can help you draw more cards, it's still like you could discard to Liliana or stuff like that, but it does present a kind of issues at times where you'll probably do really well against the more aggressive decks, but then kind of just fall by the wayside against control a little bit more often. Speaking of control, we go to Azorius Control. Probably the deck, if I was interested in like running up standard, I would probably play. The games are a little bit longer with this one, but you tend to have the most answers. We're seeing things like Sunset Reveille in the main, Marches, Get Lost, fewer copies of Deduce this week. Just more interaction. Temporary Lockdown is very good against the aggressive decks. Depopulate, Sunfall as well. Dissipates as a 4 of is interesting. Just playing. I don't love playing 3 mana counters into a format that's like 1 and 2 drops. You just kind of get behind on value at times. I would probably play a couple more Deduce, to be honest, but this one's doing reasonable well. And then Elspeth, Archangel Elspeth is another win condition. You have your Restless Anchorage. Sunken Citadel plays really nicely with both Anchorage and Myrex as ways to get a reduced cost for the activated ability. No Field of Ruin in this one, or Demolition Field's a little interesting. Just being able to target your opponents like Myrex or stuff like that has a lot of utility in the games. From Azorius, we go to Jeskai Control, Jeskai Dragon. Very similar kind of overlap, but you get access to Lightning Helix. You technically have more tap lands or a more awkward mana base at times. You're playing things like Elegant Parlor, Thundering Fall, stuff of that nature. You have the Dissipate package still. Celestis helps. Celestis is another thing in the blue-white control that you might want to put in. I think the Celestis, even in that mono black deck, playing a Celestis could be reasonable because you can pitch the cards you don't need, also gains you some life. The Fairy, untapping, tapping Celestis is nice. Lightning Helix gives you some life gain and reach. Zergo and Ojutai as another way to attack in. But we're seeing like the Sunfall, Farewell, Lockdown. So fewer depopulates, but some bigger end sweepers here. Still have the full set of Restless Anchorage in the mana base, but no Myrex in this version here. So to the budget deck. This is Platinum to Mythic. It's not showing up in Diamond, so it's pretty much like a Plat deck. But 61%, it is a mono blue tempo, and I don't believe any cards in here. Like tempo ninja style artifact deck. 1 rare, Otawara. But basically you have like cheap effects, Ginger Brute, Network Disruptor. These are artifacts. The Spyglass Siren makes artifacts. Then you can equip Zoetic Glyph to those artifacts to make it bigger. You have Urza's Retrofitter that can animate an artifact into a 4/4. Prosperous Thief, Moon Circuit Hackett plays really nice with all these cheap evasive creatures because you can sneak them in with ninjas. Machine Over Matter is just a cheap bounce spell along with Fading Hope, and then High Speed Hoverbike is another evasive cheap creature with a cheap crew cross. So kind of a bad smuggler's copter, doesn't give you draw loot, but flying 2/2 that cruise for 1. So interesting little budget deck if you're interested. Ottawa is a super safe craft. Pretty much every blue deck will play a copy of it in the mana base. Sees play in all the Eternal formats as well. So one of the safer crafts if you're looking at rares. So prize deck unveil time. I will explain this one. It is a screenshot. I'll paste the deck list so you can see. This one here, 22-2 by Mojoe from Twitch. Started off, got peaked, 13. They went 22-2 with this version. They were playing different versions. Quality might be a little low because it was a photo, but it's kind of a weird hybrid. You have fight rigging. It's a cascade deck. So Geological Appraiser could cascade into fight rigging. You have Pugnacious Hammerskull to trigger it. And then you could get out Trumpeting Carnosaur or Tali. You have Angel Fire Ignition to give things haste. You have Nahiri's Resolve to give haste, which plays pretty nice. Push-pull. So you can go channel, or the discard effect on Trumpeting Carnosaur and then pull back multiple copies of Carnosaur, which is kind of cool. So they were doing very well with it. I'm going to preface, I tried recording this for a video, and I went 1-7 with the deck, and I tweak little things here and there for my own personal preference. Worked for them, didn't work for me. I personally, I recorded the video, the gameplay wasn't great for even a video, so I just didn't put it out. Again, happy for them, it was working for them. I was watching the stream, they were beating up, they played previous versions with Quintarius, for example. It was working for them. They had a hell of a run, so congrats to them. I'll share the list. I just want to preface that if you have the cards, try it out, see if it works for you. The one thing I would say, depending on what you're running into, I was running into a lot more control. 4 of my 7 matches were against variations control. I went up to the 4th Cavern. I would also suggest switching 1 to 2 lands for basics. Field of Ruin stripped mine me a couple times, and they kind of screwed over my game plan. But cool deck. Congrats to Mojoe. If you like these kind of more janky brews, he does a lot on his channel on Twitch, so check him out as well. That's it for the week. Let me know what you think. We'll catch you next time. Thanks for watching.